Hi everybody. Hello. I just want to say there are no penises in my presentation. None. Okay? But what am I going to talk about? It's actually really difficult with this echo, but anyway, I'll carry on. I'm going to talk about... I'm going to talk about how my journey as a graphic designer to becoming a writer, editor, and publisher. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I think graphic design, and in fact all design, is at a bit of a crossroads. And I think I've lived through as a graphic designer, I've lived through three very big changes that changed what it meant to be a graphic designer. And the first one was the arrival in the late 80s of the computer, the Apple Mac. That changed everything. We had to rethink the way we functioned as designers. You couldn't do it by hand anymore. You had to do it digitally. That was a big change. It changed everything. You became the typesetter. Everything changed. The second big change happened about 10 years later, and that was the internet. And the internet fundamentally changed something about being a graphic designer, which was that in the old days, as a print-based graphic designer, you had complete control over your outcome. You could go to the printer and make sure it was printed absolutely perfectly. But the internet came along, and you designed websites, and you didn't know how people would view them. They would look different on different browsers. So again, designers had to make a mental adjustment. So two really big changes in my experience. But I think now we're entering the third great change. Who knows what that is? Who can guess, or who knows what it is? Any ideas? Shall I tell you? Automation. What? Somebody said something. I definitely heard somebody say something. Automation. I think graphic design is being automated. I think we're quite close to being able to produce graphic design remotely using artificial intelligence. There's already, I won't go into it now, but there's already some quite advanced work being done in automizing the design process. So if graphic design becomes something that's done by machines, where does that leave us? What are we going to do? Well, I think as graphic designers, we have to adapt. We have to find new ways of functioning and using the graphic design brain, the graphic design sensibility, to do other things. And in a way, we're really well placed to do this, because one of the great things about being a graphic designer is you interact with lots and lots of different worlds and disciplines. You get a fantastic education as a graphic designer into how other systems, other worlds, other disciplines work. So maybe we can just take some of that and use it for ourselves. So for me, this journey was one that went from being a graphic designer, designing record covers. And I had a studio in London. We started in late 80s, 1980s, and we produced record covers. These guys, do people know Primal Scream? Yeah? Yeah. Oh. They were the loveliest, nicest clients I ever had. And they would come in for meetings, but we couldn't talk about design because they always wanted to talk about drugs. And so the first 20 minutes would be a discussion about the drugs they'd taken and how it had done things to them. They were amazing. This was done in the times when record companies had big budgets. This was a photo shoot in the USA. Amazing budget. Go off to America and shoot this stuff. Lots of what I would call art direction, designing record covers. But we knew that something was happening. Napster had arrived, and the record companies were getting nervous. Budgets were falling, and we knew we couldn't keep designing record covers forever. So we started to do other things. And one of the things that I became interested in was writing about design. And so I left studio life, and I set up as a consultant, a writer, and I wrote this book. And I'm told, some very kind person has told me there's a really good Polish translation of this, but I don't know. We'll see. But I became really interested in the design discourse, the discussion that was going on around design in the late 90s. And one of the places where this discussion was most active was on Design Observer, American design blog. So I would contribute to that, and it was a way of, if you wanted to join the discourse, you kind of had to be a writer. So I became really interested in writing about design. And then I got offered a 1-hour slot on a radio station in London called Resonance FM. You can get it online. It's absolutely brilliant, wonderful, wonderful radio station. And they gave me 1 hour every week to interview graphic designers and talk about graphic design. And one of the people I had on the radio was this guy. This is a guy called Tony Brooke. And I didn't know Tony at the time, but he came on the show. And afterwards, I discovered that he had a real interest in publishing. He was an interesting guy because he was also a graphic design collector. He collects graphic design. And he has the most amazing collection of 20th century design. Some of you will know this, famous Neue Grafik. Original sets are very expensive. He has 3, I think. And he has this most amazing collection of mostly Swiss posters. So he was a kind of interesting dynamic, someone interested in design's past, in graphic design's history. He'd also done something that I hadn't done. He'd done his own publishing. He'd produced a number of small publications. This is a graphic designer's reading lists. He asked 50 graphic designers to provide a reading list. Really, really interesting. This was a publication about punk graphics. So Tony and I sat down and said, we both realized we wanted to have our own publishing company. We wanted to take control of the publishing process. Because my experience with working with big publishers was they control the fuck out of it. They want to design it themselves, they want to write it themselves, they want to tell you what to do. These are smart people, but they're locked into a business structure that is very, very inflexible. And this was 8 years ago, I think. So when we said to people, we're starting a publishing company, we're going to produce books, they said, why would you do that? Books are finished. E-books are what matters. And I went to see the guy who who runs this shop. This is a really wonderful shop in London called Magma. And he sells graphic design, illustration books. And I went to him and I said, Mark, I'm going to start a publishing company. And he said, don't do it. He said, don't do it. He said, Amazon is killing publishing. E-books are on the rise. He said, don't publish books. Do something else, anything else, but don't publish books. And I said to him, but you run a successful shop. He said, well, when he started, it was successful. And then something happened. He started in, I think, the early 90s. And he was selling shed loads of books, lots and lots of books. And then something happened, and his book sales did that. And that thing was Google Images. Because before Google Images, and it's hard to believe it, but there was a time before Google Images. Before Google Images, if designers needed reference, they went to the bookshop and they bought armfuls of books, came back, and went through them looking for inspiration or reference. With Google Images, you don't have to do that. So he said, don't start a publishing company. And then I thought, well, okay, I've never been to a graphic design studio. I've never been to a design studio, an architect studio, a fashion designer studio, where I haven't seen this, shelves and shelves of books. Maybe designers are still buying books. And then I came across this quote by Umberto Eco, and he said, the book is like the spoon, scissors, the hammer, the wheel. Once invented, it cannot be improved. And that's kind of how I feel about the book. It is perfect technology. We saw Eric's books. Everything he showed us is online, but when you make it into a book, it acquires a new life. It acquires a new entity. So we thought, fuck it, we'll start a publishing company. So we set up unit editions. Books on graphic design, for graphic designers, by graphic designers. And what we were able to do was using the skills we'd acquired as designers, working with clients, working closely with various sorts of businesses. We reckoned we knew enough, arrogantly, we knew enough to start our own publishing company. And we did. We set it up, we did what everybody else does, and we published our first book. And we were very pleased with this. It's a book called Studio Culture. And it came out of an observation we'd made that people were graduating from design school, and they were having to start studios on day one. You used to work for 10 years or 15 years and then start your own studio. We realize now that people were starting studios from scratch. So this was a book to tell you how other people had started their studios. We published it, and it nearly wiped us out. It nearly killed us. And the reason it did that was because we used the traditional distribution system. We put the book through a book distributor, and the book distributor took it into the shops and said, would you like to stock this? And months later, some money trickles back. So we knew we couldn't exist like that. But then we noticed there was a paradox. What if we used the internet to sell our books? Instead of going through this really cumbersome book distribution system, what if we used the internet? What if we said the only place to buy our books is online? So we set up a website. This is the old one. Published various blogs, etc., to support it. And then we published this, our second book, which is an investigation into something called super graphics. And again, just no publisher No mainstream publisher would allow us to do a cover like that. They would say, no, no, we want photography on the front cover. We want the type bigger. But we were able to do the kinds of covers that we know designers like and which we like. And supergraphics is this amazing discipline where people paint on walls. But the definition of supergraphics is it has to go, if I just paint on that wall there, that's a mural. But if I go onto the ceiling and the floor and around the corner, that's supergraphics. So we looked at some amazing examples around the world of, this is a really good example, this one, of genuine supergraphics. And then publishing this book taught us that we could survive. We could exist. We could financially survive. So we published our second book, which was a history of the Dutch design group Total Design. Absolutely wonderful Dutch group from the 60s. And again, we did all the things that you can't do if your books are going into bookshops. Total Design were early pioneers of corporate identity. We call it branding today. And then today, this is our website today. And fundamental to what we do is social media. Again, it allows us to talk to people all over the world. And I had a meeting with a big publisher. He came to see us, find out what we were doing. And he said, I love your advertising. I said, we don't do advertising. Oh, you know, that stuff, he said, that stuff you do on Twitter, that's great. So it is kind of advertising, but we see it as a conversation. It's a way of talking to people, finding out what people are interested in, telling them what we're doing. And so you have a dialogue. And this was impossible in the days before social media. You could, as a distributor, as a maker, you could not have these conversations, but you can now. You can know your audience. You can know who you're speaking to. So social media, really, really important. Instagram. And this is where we are. We work in London, in southwest London. This is our kitchen. The tiles are by Wim Krauw, famous Dutch. Some of you will know who Wim Krauw is, but he's a wonderful Dutch designer. But of course, if you're doing everything yourself, if you're self-sufficient, you have to have stuff like this. You have to have books piling up. We're surrounded by books. And we've changed recently, but most times a truck would arrive and we'd have to take the stuff off the truck, and then we have to put it into boxes, and then it gets posted all over the world. But because our audience is a design audience, we think about the packaging, the way the books are packaged. And so when you get one of our books, it's a pleasurable experience. I just want to say something about the mechanics of what we do, because a lot of our books are historical. And again, this is something that I think is a very new thing. I think something's happened, and again, it's the internet that's leading this. Publishing books about design history 10 years ago was a minority activity. It was a tiny, tiny thing. But because of the internet, and because you can see everything online, we found that there's a newfound interest in graphic design's history. And this for us is another big change. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to find archives. We have to find places where this stuff is stored and where it exists. So we spend a lot of time in places like this. This is an archive in London, and this is I'm going to talk about him in a second, but this is a wonderful designer, and all his work has been preserved. So I always say to people, keep everything. Of course, in the digital age, we don't have to worry about that because everything's stored online. But I think if we don't keep if we don't keep the physical outputs that we produce, then there will be nothing left. So I just want to say something here about the process of designing a book. And I'm sure everybody who functions in this room as a designer knows that everything, if you want to do anything good, it takes a long time. Everything takes a long time. So for books, we start with a huge picture edit. We look through hundreds and hundreds of images. We start to put some kind of order into them. Lots of research. Who are these people in this photograph? Who are they? Were they important? Do we need to know who they are? And then the design process starts. Many of you will be familiar with that process, obviously, but it's a meticulous process that takes a long, long time, and we refine it over hours and hours of work, and eventually we get close to the finished thing. We print all over the world. This book was printed in China. And it's just a case of making something. I think if books are going to exist today in the age of the internet, they have to have something special. They have to have qualities that are remarkable. So we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money making sure that the books are perfect artifacts. So I'm just going to say something. I mentioned design history and the importance of historical characters, historical figures. And the kind of rule of thumb we use is if we're going to publish a book about an historical figure, they have to have some relevance. They have to be able to inspire a new generation, a young generation. So this is a man called F.H.K. Henrien. And I think Henrien is the most important British graphic designer of all time. More important than Neville Brody or Peter Saville, but he was German. But he came to the UK, and he was, again, it was echoes of what Eric Kessels was talking about, doing more than just being a designer. He designed. He was self-taught. He didn't have any training, but he designed the first portable sewing machine. And doesn't that look like an Apple product? Isn't that what Apple would do if they were doing a sewing machine? So he was really remarkable. He was one of the first designers to think about television as a design medium. In the 1950s, when television started, it was a theatrical medium. Henrien knew it could also be a design medium. So he designed some of the first TV graphics. And he was also passionate about production techniques. So he used this is a poster that went up in the street, but they used the huge dot enlargement to create a dramatic effect. So he would use print technology. He would push it as far as he could. And he was also an exhibition designer. And I think you can just see up in the left-hand corner, you can see he was also, I think, one of the early proponents of information design, data visualization. But he was really known as a identity designer. He was the first in Europe to really understand what identity design meant in the modern age. And this is his most famous identity. He did it for KLM, and it's almost unchanged to this day. And no other airline has done that. No other airline has retained its identity over such a long period of time. But KLM is pretty much the same. And this to me is just wonderful, wonderful. We'd call it branding today, but for me, it's just the most fabulous piece of timeless identity design. It's a cement company. But look how cool he makes it look. And this, again, he was very early he was reading semiotics, reading perception theory. And so this is the London Electricity Board. This is the company that gives Londoners their electricity. But look how he cuts a lightning bolt into the design. It reads as LEB, but there's the sense in which there's a lightning bolt going through it. So I always hold Henry up as an example of the sort of historical figure that we're interested in publishing, because we can all learn from him. We can look at the breadth of his vision. We can't all be him, but he can be the catalyst, the influence for something great. So we occasionally do posters, which we sell online. And I'm just going to run through a few recent titles we've done. This is a wonderful, wonderful designer called Lance Wyman. Lance is still with us, very active. He's in his late 70s, but you wouldn't know it. And he made his name, this is his studio in Manhattan. And he trained as a product designer. And this is one of his first jobs, and you can see the dimensional aspect to his work. But this is the work that made him famous. He went, as a young man in 1968, he went to Mexico City to design the Mexico Olympics of 1968. And for me, it's just the most stunning piece of work, a really remarkable piece of visual communication. And then after the Olympics, the Mexicans asked him to stay on, and he designed the icons for the Mexico City Metro. And I just think that the clarity and the simplicity, and we look at this stuff and we think, yeah, okay, it's nice. But actually, to be this, and the designers, graphic designers in the audience will understand this, to be that simple and that pure is not easy. And there's a second thing to his theory around icons. Icons only work if you can verbalize them. So all these stations have names, but people will say, I'll meet you at the Bell station. So the icons, they're not abstract. They're actual, and they can be verbalized. And that's a really strong theory that runs through his work. So he stayed on in Mexico and did a lot of really interesting work. And while we were in his studio in Manhattan, we noticed he had on his shelves, he had these funny black books, grungy old black books. And we said to him, what are those? And he said, oh, they're just they're sketchbooks, log books. And we said, no, let's have a look at them. And every day, at the end of every working day, he puts what he's done, or fragments of what he's done, into this book. And he's done this for every year since the early 70s. And again, it's just we can learn from that kind of discipline. I can't do that, but isn't it remarkable that he does it? And you can see how that discipline goes through into his work. It's a holistic approach to work. So this is the most beautiful collection of his sketches. He doesn't like calling them sketchbooks because although they contain sketchbooks, they're really log books. He logs his daily output. He doesn't do them anymore because he uses the computer now, but every day he outputs thumbnails from his computer and assembles those. So what's interesting about this is that we published this about 6 months ago, and it's become really, really successful. And again, this ties in with something Eric said. People responded to this really, really well because we're surrounded by perfection. We're surrounded by work that is immaculate and it's super refined. But actually, sometimes we just want to look at this stuff. We want to see it in its raw state. We want to see how it was made, why it was made. This is another recent book. This is a collection of graphic design journals since, I think the first one was 1922. So there have been design magazines since 1922. The earliest one that we found was, this is not it, but we found some Dutch magazines from the 20s. They were the earliest we could find. But we know the world is full of, every country now produces a design magazine, so we've collected them. Again, a lot of research, digging around in archives, trying to find this stuff, but we found them. And seen this before? Some Polish magazine. People know this magazine? Project? Okay. You need to know about it. It's the most amazing Polish magazine. I can't remember when it started. It's been around a long time. And it's just absolutely remarkable. It's a mixture of design and art and all the great Polish posters. And two people came to us, a woman called Charlotte West and a Polish designer called Edgar Bonk. Edgar's not here, is he? No, okay. And they had a collection of this wonderful magazine, so we made a little book out of it. And they used all the great Polish illustrators and artists. And if you don't know it, check it out, because it's incredible. Pretty good, huh? Okay, so I'm going to finish now. Why books? Well, I think books are amazing technology. I think the dynamism you can achieve on a printed page is absolutely unsurpassed. And I know there's some wonderful web design, but the problem I'm finding with web design is it's templated. We're locked into systems. We have to adhere to these templates and guidelines. The printed page is still free. It's still a landscape where you can create dynamic relationships between text and image. And I found this great quote by a man called William Morris. William Morris was a Victorian designer, a kind of real pioneer of design. And he said, "The picture book is not, perhaps, absolutely necessary to man's life, but it gives us such endless pleasure, and it is so intimately connected with the other absolutely necessary art of imaginative literature that it must remain one of the very worthiest things towards the production of which reasonable men and women should strive." Thank you.